jugador más joven de la historia en completar los Grand Slam, los 4.
Qué maravilla sentir esto. Todo el equipazo con su padre al frente en esta ocasión.
Carlos Alcaraz just completed the career Grand Slam at 22 years old, becoming the youngest player ever to achieve that milestone. Then he immediately dropped a bombshell about retirement that has the entire tennis world in shock. The kid who's supposed to dominate for the next 2 decades just announced he doesn't see himself playing at 35. 13 years of potential dominance. Gone. Just like that. Do you think Alcaraz will actually retire at 35? Or will he pull a Brady and keep playing into his 40s? Drop your prediction below. Let's start with what Carlos Alcaraz actually said, because the quote is genuinely surprising coming from someone who just made history at age 22. Speaking to El Partidazo de Cope in Spanish, he explained his perspective on longevity in professional tennis. And it's not the optimistic, I'll play forever attitude you typically hear from young champions.
La verdad que ahora mismo no estamos pensando a ver hasta dónde voy a llegar. Si te digo la verdad, yo creo que esos mismos, ¿no?, que están jugando con 40 años, Djokovic con 38, Monfils su último ya con más de 23 años en el circuito. Seguro que ellos, si les preguntas a 22 años, te van a decir, bueno, yo jugaré hasta los 33, hasta los 34 como mucho, pero yo creo que al final la carrera, el tenis, yo creo que la pasión por la que tienen por el deporte y por el tenis nunca se acaba, incluso cada año va más, y yo creo que eso es lo que le hacen estar compitiendo tanto tiempo. Yo, si te digo la verdad, yo no me veo compitiendo más de 35, de los 35 años, pero bueno, como he dicho, veremos ahí hasta dónde puedo llegar, hasta también lo que me diga el cuerpo. Vamos a intentar cuidarnos, pero ojalá tener la pasión y sobre todo la vitalidad que tienen ellos para estar compitiendo al máximo nivel con esa edad.
Gracias.
He said tennis is a very demanding sport, both mentally and physically, and even more so nowadays. The speed of the ball has increased, the demands on the court have intensified, and the schedule doesn't help. Players are expected to compete nearly year-round with minimal breaks, traveling constantly, dealing with different surfaces and time zones, all while maintaining peak physical condition. Then, he dropped the retirement age comment. He said that right now, he doesn't see himself playing at 35. Although he acknowledged that maybe the moment will come when he'll keep going with more enthusiasm than ever and be motivated to continue until his body won't allow it anymore. That's a massive statement for multiple reasons. First, it suggests that Alcaraz is already thinking about life after tennis at age 22. Most players his age are focused exclusively on winning their first Grand Slam or breaking into the top 10. Alcaraz has already completed the career Grand Slam with 7 major titles, and he's apparently already contemplating retirement. Second, it reveals his awareness of how brutal professional tennis has become physically. The modern game is faster, more physical, and more demanding than previous generations. Players are hitting harder, running farther, and putting more stress on their bodies than ever before. The injury rate among top players is climbing, and career longevity is decreasing despite advances in sports medicine and training techniques. Third, it shows that Alcaraz isn't delusional about his ability to sustain this level indefinitely. He's watching players like Novak Djokovic, who he just beat in the Australian Open final, still competing at 38 years old. But Djokovic is an outlier, not the norm. Most players are washed up or retired by their mid-30s. Alcaraz seems realistic about which category he's likely to fall into.
No. I saw the video and I saw the people talking about it, but there weren't a single second that I thought about retiring.
The context of when he made this statement matters enormously. This wasn't some random interview during a quiet period. This was right after winning the Australian Open, completing the career Grand Slam, and achieving something only 8 other men in history have accomplished. This should be the moment of maximum optimism and confidence. Instead, he's talking about retirement. That suggests the physical toll of reaching this achievement was genuinely severe. He played a 5-hour-plus semifinal against Alexander Zverev, then had to recover in less than 48 hours to play Djokovic in the final. By the time he won, his body was absolutely destroyed. And that experience apparently made him think seriously about how many more years he can sustain that kind of punishment. He specifically mentioned that a very wise person told him not to think 15 years ahead, but rather in 5-year increments. That's actually excellent advice for any professional athlete. The temptation is to project your entire career trajectory and assume you'll be competing at peak levels for 15 or 20 years. But the reality is that injuries, burnout, and declining performance can derail those plans instantly. By thinking in 5-year blocks, Alcaraz can set realistic goals for the next phase of his career without overcommitting to an unrealistic long-term timeline. He can focus on maximizing the next 5 years, then reassess based on how his body feels and what his motivation looks like at that point. But let's be honest about what retiring at 35 would actually mean for Alcaraz's career. He's currently 22. If he plays until 35, that's 13 more years of professional tennis. He already has 7 Grand Slam titles. If he maintains even a fraction of his current success rate, he could easily accumulate 20-plus majors by age 35. That would put him in the conversation with Djokovic, Rafael Nadal, and Roger Federer as one of the all-time greats. So retiring at 35 isn't some premature career-ending decision. It's actually a perfectly reasonable timeline that would still allow him to build one of the greatest careers in tennis history. The shock is that he's even thinking about it at age 22, not that 35 is somehow too young to retire. The comparison to other sports is instructive here. In football, running backs are considered old at 30. In basketball, most players decline significantly after 32. In baseball, position players can last into their late 30s, but usually at reduced effectiveness. Tennis is unusual in that a few exceptional players like Djokovic can compete at the highest level approaching 40, but that's genuinely rare. Federer retired at 41, but his last few years were plagued by injuries and declining results. Nadal retired at 38 after years of injury struggles. These are all-time greats who extended their careers as long as physically possible, and even they couldn't sustain peak performance much past 35. Alcaraz seems to be looking at that data and concluding that 35 is probably a realistic endpoint for his body's ability to compete at Grand Slam level. The schedule complaint he mentioned is particularly significant. The ATP calendar is genuinely brutal. Players are expected to compete in Masters 1000 events, ATP 500s, the 4 Grand Slams, the ATP Finals, Davis Cup, and potentially the Olympics. That's nearly year-round competition with minimal off-season. The physical and mental toll accumulates, and players who don't carefully manage their schedules burn out quickly. Alcaraz has already started making strategic decisions to protect his longevity. He withdrew from the Rotterdam Open right after winning the Australian Open, despite being the defending champion there. That's a smart move. He recognized that his body needed rest more than it needed another tournament appearance, even one where he could have defended his title. That kind of schedule management will be crucial if he wants to make it to 35 while maintaining competitive excellence. He can't play every tournament. He can't chase every ranking point. He has to prioritize the majors, the biggest Masters events, and allow his body adequate recovery time between competitions. The coaching change he made right before the Australian Open is also relevant here. He parted ways with Juan Carlos Ferrero, his longtime coach who helped him win multiple Grand Slams. That decision shocked many people, but Alcaraz clearly felt he needed a change to continue improving. Bringing in Samuel Lopez paid off immediately with an Australian Open title, validating the decision. But that willingness to make drastic changes to his team shows that Alcaraz is thinking strategically about how to maximize his career. He's not sentimentally attached to doing things a certain way just because it worked in the past. If something needs to change to extend his career or improve his results, he'll make that change regardless of how uncomfortable it might be. The question about whether he'll actually retire at 35 is genuinely fascinating. Athletes say all kinds of things about retirement plans early in their careers, and those plans almost never survive contact with reality. Tom Brady said he'd retire at 35. He played until 45. Plenty of tennis players have suggested they'd retire young, then kept playing because they loved competing or needed the income. But there's something different about how Alcaraz framed this. He wasn't making a definitive declaration. He said he doesn't see himself playing at 35 right now, but acknowledged that might change depending on his motivation and physical condition at that point. That's actually a mature and realistic perspective. He's leaving the door open to playing longer if circumstances allow, but he's not committing to something unrealistic just to satisfy fans or media expectations. He's being honest that the physical demands of modern tennis make long careers increasingly difficult, and he's realistic about his own limitations. The financial dimension also matters here. Alcaraz has already earned tens of millions of dollars in prize money and endorsements. He's got a massive Nike deal and multiple other sponsorships. If he plays until 35 and continues winning majors, he'll have accumulated generational wealth that will last him and his family forever. So financial necessity won't be a factor forcing him to extend his career like it is for lower-ranked players. That financial security actually gives him the freedom to retire when he wants, rather than when economic circumstances force him to. If at 35 his body is breaking down and he's no longer competing for majors, he can walk away without worrying about supporting himself. Most players don't have that luxury. The mental aspect of retirement is also worth considering. Tennis is an incredibly lonely sport. You're traveling constantly, living out of hotels, away from family and friends for months at a time. The mental toll of that lifestyle accumulates just like the physical toll. By 35, Alcaraz will have been living that lifestyle for nearly 2 decades. It's entirely reasonable that he might want a normal life with stability and time at home. Some fans are already panicking about this retirement talk, worried that tennis is losing its next generational star too early. But that's a selfish perspective. Alcaraz doesn't owe fans an extra 5 or 10 years of his body and mental health. If 35 is when he's ready to walk away, that's his decision and should be respected. The comparison to Djokovic is particularly interesting. Djokovic is 38 and still competing for majors. He just lost to Alcaraz in the Australian Open final, but he was competitive throughout the match. Some people will look at that and argue Alcaraz should be able to play that long too. But Djokovic is a genetic freak with incredible injury resistance and recovery abilities. He's not the standard. He's the exception. Most players break down long before 38. Expecting Alcaraz to replicate Djokovic's longevity is unrealistic and unfair. The other factor is motivation. Alcaraz has already completed the career Grand Slam at 22. He's won 7 majors. He's been world number 1. What's left to motivate him for another 15 years? Accumulating counting stats? Trying to break Djokovic's Grand Slam record? Those are external goals that might not provide internal motivation. At some point, winning another major stops being thrilling and starts being just another obligation. When you've experienced the highest highs of your profession multiple times, the motivation to keep grinding starts diminishing. Alcaraz seems aware of that dynamic and is being realistic about how long his internal drive will sustain him. The immediate decision to withdraw from Rotterdam shows he's already prioritizing longevity over short-term results. He could have played and potentially won, adding another title to his resume. But he chose rest and recovery instead, recognizing that his body needs time to heal after the brutal Australian Open schedule. That's the kind of smart decision-making that could actually extend his career beyond 35. Players who burn out early are usually the ones who play every tournament, chase every ranking point, and never give their bodies adequate rest. If Alcaraz continues being strategic about scheduling and rest, he might surprise himself and still be competing effectively at 36 or 37. Carlos Alcaraz just completed the career Grand Slam at 22 and immediately started talking about retirement at 35. 13 years might sound like a long time, but in tennis terms, it's barely long enough to build a legendary career. Whether he actually retires then or keeps playing is anyone's guess. Hit that like button and subscribe to follow his journey toward whatever endpoint he chooses.